Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Winding Down the Pandemic Relief Programs. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all audio and video connections are muted at this time. You are, however, welcome to submit written questions throughout today's presentation. To submit a written question, select the Q&A button on your screen, select Ask a Question, and enter your question into the meeting box provided. Questions are being moderated, so if you do not see your question immediately, please give us a few moments, and questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. You will also have the opportunity to come off of mute to ask your question as time allows. Some organizations may have restrictions on the team's chats and questions. So if you're not able to type your question, you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation. With that, I'll turn the call over to Christopher Tate, Group Leader in the Office of State and Grantee Relations here at the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, U.S. Department of Education. Go ahead, Christopher.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you for those that are attending today. I'm joined by my colleagues Brandon Weber and Mary Kahn from the Office of State and Grantee Relations. Brandon and Mary have been essential to managing the department's grant wind down activities for the emergency programs. And we're also joined today by Chris Birch. Chris leads our reporting efforts for the pandemic relief programs for the Office of the Chief Data Officer. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will include reminders about current flexibilities available to support grantees for winding down the ESSER, GEER, and EANS programs. We'll also lay out the timelines and activities required to close out grants for each program funded by the CARES Act, the CARISA Act, and also the American Rescue Plan. This administrative approach is consistent with the department's general policies for closing out all formula grants and not just these emergency funds. Next slide, please. Before I turn today's presentation over to Mary, I want to pause a moment to reflect upon the spending of pandemic relief funds to date. Spending data indicates that 92% of all American Rescue Plan funds will be spent or extended for future liquidation by January 30th, 2025. As we approach the upcoming transition, the current administration is doing all it can to ensure consistency in the management and continuity of activities for these multi-year programs. It is in this vein that the team will focus today on support for grantees in addressing their ongoing needs in the year ahead, especially with respect to the implementation of late liquidations and tidings waivers. Now, I'll turn things over to my colleague Mary to provide updates on the flexibilities available to grantees as you prepare to wind down your programs. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you very much, Christopher. So I'll be presenting on behalf of our Grants Administration Lead. I am a Program Officer in SGR, and starting with late liquidations and the tidings waivers. So as you all may be aware, the department has offered several flexibilities, to assist states with closing out their pandemic relief grants and closing out in compliance. These flexibilities include opportunities for states to extend the liquidation period for properly and timely obligations, and it also includes the ability to seek a tidings waiver for consolidation of ARP administrative funds. Next slide, please. The department continues to accept liquidation extension requests for CARISA and ARP programs similar to those that we accepted for the CARES program. So here you can see for CARISA Act programs, the department has to date extended the liquidation period for 54 CARISA grantees, extending the liquidation period for CARISA ESSER, GEER, and EANS grants through March of 2025. And this has amounted to over $700 million in funds remaining available for liquidation in service of continuing to support pandemic recovery for students and educators. Now, for the ARP Act programs, the department has approved 15 requests thus far and is currently reviewing an additional 11 requests. Grantees may continue to submit requests and are strongly encouraged to do so before December 31st of this year, December 31st, 2024. Requests received after this date will be reviewed, but grantees, you may experience an interruption to G5 access after January 28th of 2025 if requests are still under review. Next slide, please. And looking at the timeline and processes for late liquidations, we see here the CRRSA obligation period ended September 30th of 2023, and the regulatory liquidation period ended January 28th, 2024. However, grantees that have not yet sought an extension for CRRSA funds or need to submit an amendment to an approved request may still do so through the remainder of this year, again, through the end of 2024. But please make every effort to submit a request by December 31st of 2024. All funds approved for an extended liquidation period must be liquidated by March 31st of 2025. So again, please submit any lingering CRRSA requests or amendments by the end of December. States may also use the CRRSA extension template, the liquidation extension template, the Excel document for traditional late liquidation requests, but only in cases when performing multiple accounting adjustments and if they are seeking to liquidate all remaining funds. If a state needs to amend its CRRSA liquidation request, please submit an email outlining the expenditures that should be updated and submit revisions on the most recent extension template. So you can add additional rows if you're, for example, adding additional subrecipients to your existing template so that we have it all in one place. And then submit that to the state mailbox and copy your assigned program officer. It is suggested that all amendments to CRRSA extensions, again, be submitted by the end of this year. Because the ARP obligation period ended September 30th of 2024, no additional obligations can be made for any program costs. However, under the late liquidation flexibilities, the liquidation of program funds may continue until March 28th of 2026 for grantees with approved extensions. Now, for administrative funds, not program funds, but administrative funds, grantees with approved consolidated tidings waivers may obligate ARP SCA, only SCA administrative funds through March 31st of 2026. And we will address more information related to the implementation of approved tidings waivers a bit later in today's presentation. As we approach the end of the regulatory liquidation period for ARP funds at the end of January of 2025, we want to provide a reminder that grantees must not draw all remaining funds or a large amount at the end of the liquidation period unless there is an immediate cash need. Drawing funds without an immediate cash need results in what's called an excessive draw and will require returns of funds to the department, including earned interest on those funds. So rather, if a grantee or a subrecipient is not able to complete ARP liquidations by January 28th of 2025, we invite you to utilize the pandemic flexibilities and submit for a late liquidation drawdown or a liquidation extension. Next slide, please. And now going into department oversight of approved liquidation extension requests. Following approval, liquidation extensions will be monitored in a manner consistent with the department's oversight of its grantees. The monitoring of drawdowns during the extended period and formal reviews are the two primary means by which liquidation extensions will be monitored. Drawdown monitoring is an essential internal control. During the extended liquidation period, grantees are placed on route payment, and they're placed on route payment once the regular liquidation period has concluded. Then grantees will need to submit a summary of each drawdown request, which includes the amount associated per an entity in the request, included within that particular request. SGR will then ensure that the funds and the entities in that request are aligned to the state's approved extension request and any previous draws of funds during the liquidation extension period. And we will check that an amendment is not needed to the grantee's request. Formal reviews will include ongoing data verification. This is our second form of monitoring. Formal reviews will include a review of the grantee's oversight activities at least twice during the liquidation extension period and during the implementation of the state's extension request. Once the regular liquidation period has concluded, program officers will work with a state to validate the data included within the state's approved request. Formal monitoring will address the grantee's process for seeking an extension, its provision of subrecipient monitoring, and will include a review of grantee reimbursement requests and the associated documentation from subrecipients, as well as the grantee's internal processes for state-level uses of funds that are within a liquidation extension drawdown. Additional information about formal reviews of liquidation extensions is available in the ESSER and EANS liquidation extension monitoring protocols, which are available on our website. And these protocols may be useful as the state is preparing its own processes. Next slide, please. A bit more about oversight of approved requests. Grantees are responsible to implement and monitor the state's approved liquidation extension, including fulfilling the attestations included within the state's request, and that includes confirming that activities and services included are allowable and have been properly obligated by September 30th of 2024 for ARP, September 30th of 2024, consistent with 34 CFR 76.707. It also includes that certifications and insurances included in the award documents and approved state plan remain in effect. Also, that grantees will provide continued monitoring and oversight of subrecipients in the extended liquidation period. That data verification will be provided as requested. And finally, that sufficient documentation to support the request is available with the grantee or the subrecipient. Next, you see the amendment process. The data verification process is one point when grantees may identify that an amendment to their request is needed. Some reasons for this might include increasing or decreasing a subrecipient's approved amount, or to extend the date of the extension, or to add subrecipients not included in the state's initial approved request. However, we want to underscore that amendments are not a substitute for submitting a complete request, and states should not plan to submit multiple amendments. The amendment process is intended to provide grantees and their subrecipients some flexibility, as, of course, data may change between the time of submission and the end of the liquidation period. That said, amendments requested should not deviate significantly from the initial approved request. The amendment process includes submitting an updated request template with the changes clearly noted. So, for example, adding additional rows with new subrecipients if you are adding new subrecipients, and it includes submitting an updated attestation. Reach out to your program officer if you have questions related to amending a state's approved request. Some grantees have asked if amendments are necessary to refine the uses of funds for a subrecipient. So, for example, suppose a subrecipient has requested and been approved for $100,000 of supplies and services that were properly obligated, but the costs of several expenses were less than what was anticipated at the time of submission. If there are other valid allowable expenses obligated within the ARP obligation period, the grantee may, in its oversight of the implementation and included subrecipients, approve the additional use of funds for that subrecipient without seeking an amendment. As a reminder, grantees must continue to monitor the allowability and proper obligation of ARP funds included in the approved request, as stated in the ARP attestations. This oversight should continue throughout the state's implementation of its approved request. Next slide, please. An additional flexibility provided to state education agencies is the opportunity to submit a request for a waiver of Section 421B of the General Education Provisions Act to extend the period of availability of consolidated administrative funds under ESSER Section 8201 from SEAs that consolidate at least one eligible program from the ESSER and at least one eligible program from the ARP Act. With an approved waiver, a state may continue to obligate administrative costs for the associated programs in its approved waiver and may do so until March 31st of 2026. Then, after March 31st, the grantee will have the standard 120-day period to complete liquidations, and those are able to continue in that extended period. This flexibility is specific to the state's administrative funds only and is limited to the programs consolidated under the ESSER and ARP programs as listed in the state's approved waiver. We want to underscore that program funds are not included within the waiver. It is only administrative funds. No obligations can be completed for any program costs. The obligation period for program costs ended September 30th, 2024. A common question about tidings waivers that we've received is if a state needs to seek a liquidation extension in order to request the consolidated state administrative funds tidings waiver. States do not need to seek a liquidation extension in order to request the consolidated state administrative funds waiver. However, if a state does submit a liquidation extension, we ask that the consolidated administrative funds be included in the state's extension request in the grantee section of the request document for oversight purposes. Additional information regarding the tidings waiver submission process is available on the department's website. Additionally, the department provided information for the implementation of these consolidated state administrative funds waivers to grantees through the G5 system on November 13th. This information will be posted on the department's ARP announcements webpage. If grantees have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the state program officer through the state mailbox. Next slide, please. We've covered the flexibilities offered by the department to assist states with closing out their grants. Next, we'll discuss what is needed to close out the grants in compliance. And I ask that you pay close attention in this section as there are distinct timelines for states with or without an active liquidation extension. One of the main components of the closeout of the grants is the final annual performance report, And we have my colleague, Chris Birch, here with the Office of the Chief Data Officer, who will share more about reporting updates. Over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. And hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So as Mary said, I'm Chris Birch, and I work on the Education Stabilization Fund annual performance reports for the department. First, I want to thank all of you for your efforts to report accurate data on how ESSER, GEER, and EANS funds are being used to support education throughout the country. We just wrapped up fiscal year 2023 annual performance reporting with the close of the EANS data collection. And as we are preparing to publish that data, we are also finalizing preparations for next year's data collections. The calendar for next year's data collections is displayed here and was sent to all SEAs last month. As you might have noticed, the calendar is very similar to the calendar that we used for this year's reporting. We are working right now to get you the reporting guidance and materials for next year as soon as possible. But I do want to communicate now that we are not planning any major changes to reporting for next year. So next year's fiscal year 2024 ESSER, GEER, and EANS reports will be very similar to the fiscal year 2023 reporting you just completed this year. That's all I have to share today. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, but I do appreciate your time. We will be in touch soon with more information and guidance. And again, thank you for all of your efforts to gather your data and complete your annual performance reports. We appreciate it. Thank you. I believe Brandon gets it next. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll close out with the final pieces of how we can close your grants out in compliance. In order to close out your grants, of course, you have to make sure that the grant period, including the tidings period, has expired, that the liquidation period, including grants with extensions, has expired, and that your grant, if you have between $0 and $1,000 and you don't have any outstanding requests for those funds, that those funds will now lapse and return to Treasury. As Chris talked about earlier, that your final annual performance report and data are received and approved by the department, that you don't have any financial or programmatic findings via an audit, and that all audit findings are resolved. If you have done all of those things correctly, you can use this as a checklist to close your grant out in compliance. Next slide, please. So this slide really outlines, and you'll notice on the next two slides as well, the paths that may be a timeline that your grant closeout will follow. You'll note on the slide that there are two distinct paths within the timelines. The red font is for traditional grantees or those who do not have an approved extension to the liquidation period, and they'll follow a more traditional grant closeout timeline. Grantees who do have approved extensions to the liquidation period are noted in blue. So under CARES, we know that the liquidation period ended on January 28th of 2023. And for those with extensions, it ended on March 31st of 2024. The next phase that will happen is SGR will continue to reach out to grantees, CARES grantees in the spring of 2023. And for those with extensions, you all will be contacted next year in spring or summer of 2025. During this period, SGR reaches out to you to just ensure that you don't have any additional need for those funds. If you do, you would be likely pursuing a one-time late liquidation or a liquidation extension to the period of liquidation. After that occurs, then we would expect that you are participating in the annual performance reporting for the initial opening. So again, you'll see in red for CARES grantees, you participated in that in spring or summer of this year. For those with extensions, you'll participate next year if you have any fiscal year 25 reporting. And then you'll participate in the final APR reopen in spring or fall of 2025, or summer or fall of 2025. For those with extensions, if you have FY25 expenditures to report, you will participate in summer or fall of 2026. And then in the fall of 2026, for CARES grantees, we anticipate that all funds will lapse and return to Treasury. Next slide. And this is, again, similar to the cadence that you'll see is duplicated here for CRISA grantees. The liquidation period ends again in January 28th of 2024. And in March 31st of 2025, that liquidation period would end for those with extensions. SGR will again in the spring and summer begin those conversations with all grantees to see if they need a one-time liquidation, late liquidation, or a liquidation extension. And then in the winter, you'll do a follow-up with program officers to ensure that your final reports have been received. And if there are any updates, you would participate in that final APR reopen. Again, it's different. Red for the grantees that do not have extensions, and the blue are with grantees that have extensions to the liquidation period. And then CRISA funds would revert to Treasury in the fall of 2027. And then next slide. Again, the same would be for the cadence for ARP. Those grantees would be reached out to after the liquidation period ends on January 28th, and then subsequently for March 31st of 2026 for ARP. SGR would still do the same outreach in the spring or summer, just assuring again that you don't need a liquidation extension, that you don't have a one-time late liquidation request, and that will occur again in spring, summer. The annual performance report also opens around that same time frame for those without a liquidation extension. And for those with extensions, you would be following the next year if you have any FY27 ARP reporting for GEER, ESSER, and EANS. Then you would participate in that same reopen period. And then we would anticipate that those funds, if they're no longer needed, would lapse and return to Treasury by fall of 2028. So a lot of this, again, is the cadence that we anticipate going forward. There may be some slight nuances there, but generally, this timeline would be what you can expect from SGR by way of our outreach, as well as what your participation in the activities might be by way of reporting for each of those paths. Again, red would be those without extensions, blue would be for those with extensions. Next slide. And on this slide, we just wanted to provide some additional guidance to you, particularly around if you're completing an audit. We know that some grantees reached out to say, what guidance did the department offer on continuing activities after the liquidation period? So for those of you who have liquidation extensions, this might be some guidance that you would share with any auditors. So that first link with FAQ ED3 or E3D. As well as the next piece for any of the EANS, CRISA EANS or ARP EANS disposition. You can find any FAQs at that link. Determining the fair market value, you can find how you will do that via the IRS or FEMA. And then lastly, a big resource to you on anything regarding reporting, as well as your expenditure data, can be found on the Education Stabilization Fund or ESF portal, particularly with respect to reporting. Chris mentioned the chart earlier, but you can see the grantee help section. That is also where you'll find any guidance on completing your annual performance report. If you do have questions, as always, feel free to reach out to your state mailbox, and a program officer or one of my colleagues will reach out to you to provide you with any information that you may need. And with that, we will turn it over to you, Chloe, for any questions.
Thanks, Brandon. So we'll now transition into the question and answer portion of the webinar. If you'd like to ask your question verbally, please raise your hand to be unmuted, and I'll just go in the order by which questions were asked. We'll start with any questions that are submitted in the chat. Right now, I don't see any questions that have been submitted, but as a reminder, as you start to submit questions, they are being moderated. So give me a second if you don't immediately see your question pop up in the Q&A. Okay, I see a few hands raised. Robin, I see yours went up first, so give me 1 second and I will unmute you. And then after Robin, we will go, to Michael. And after Michael, we'll go to Tam. Okay, Robin, you should be able to unmute your mic.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I did want to mention that I'm not able to put anything in the question and answer or the chat, again, as I wasn't able last session either, just for your awareness. But for my question, I heard that it was stated that the funds that are part of the tidings waiver that was applied for by the state, the administrative tidings waiver, need to also be included in the grantee portion of the liquidation extension request. Did I hear that correctly? And can I have a little bit more detail on that?
Sure. This is Christopher. That is correct. The amount of funding should be put under the state tab of the extension request template. And that's because, consistent with the way Mary explained, oversight happens. Any grantee with an approved liquidation extension after January 30th is placed on route payment. And so this mechanism allows us to track those uses of funds consistent with the approved request and ensure that we're continuing to monitor those the remaining uses of those admin funds in the same ways that we're continuing to monitor the uses of all funds that will be liquidated during that period of extension.
Okay, so each separate program should have that admin amount included in their liquidation extension. Is that correct?
Yes, if you seek a liquidation extension for ARP ESSER, ARP EANS, or ARP HCY, you should have a row specific to the amount of administrative funds for that program on your state tab.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Robin and Christopher. We'll go ahead and jump over to Jeffrey's question in the chat. I published it, so hopefully you all are able to see that. Jeffrey asked, can we get a definition on what ESF means by no major changes? Are there any minor changes that are being contemplated?
Hi, I can take that question. So, yeah, so currently we our data instruments are in the information collection request renewal process. And so until that process completes, we can't say with 100% certainty that there will be no changes next year, but we are not planning any changes to the ESSER, GEER, or EANS data collections for next year, other than the required changes to move the collections forward 1 more year. So again, we will be sending information about that out to all states as soon as possible, but we really aren't planning any additional changes to the collections for next year.
Thank you, Chris. I'll go ahead and unmute Michael. You should be able to come off mute. So go ahead and ask your question, Michael.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. I was going to type this in the chat, but my chat was also turned off, so I wasn't able to. But I was just hoping that this slide deck could be sent out to all of the webinar participants. It's very helpful and informational.
Yep, the slide deck will be we'll publish the slide deck and the and the recording to our website. So absolutely. One thing I want to just point out to folks, and I hope that this makes sense, is the chat itself is disabled, but at the top there should be a Q&A thing. So I just want to make sure that that's not the cause of folks not being able to put things in the chat. So if you see that the chat is disabled, it is disabled on purpose. But the Q&A at the top, it's kind of small, has two little comment bubbles, and try if folks could try there too if you want to ask questions, written questions. But I will go ahead and go to the next person. So allowing the mic, I think name is Tam.
Thank you. Please note that the Q&A is also marked as not available for this event, as is the chat. So forgive me for stumbling over this. I'm asking questions for a colleague that was just immediately pulled away. Is there a distinction between late liquidation and a liquidation extension? In particular, if we need to have a one-time late liquidation for our internal processing versus a liquidation extension, which I understand to be for activities that are continuing with pre-obligated or properly obligated contracts.
And I'll take that one. Thank you. You are exactly right. So if you have, and all of these, of course, have to be obligated by September 30th of the respective years. If you have something that was a completed activity, then that would be a one-time liquidation request. If you need to extend the period to further liquidate any of your obligations that were already done as of September 30th of the respective years, then that would be a late liquidation extension or extension. Those terms are a little bit nuanced or new for our use, but continue to be liquidation related to the liquidation period. So I know that extension may be a little bit new, but it's an extension to the liquidation period.
And how do we need to do anything for approval for the single late liquidation?
Yes.
Or is it the same form?
They are two different processes. Thank you. If you would send an email to your state mailbox, the program officer can send that information to you. But generally, what you would do is submit a memo outlining why you could not liquidate those funds by January 28th. And if they are obligated as of September 30th of the respective years for each of those programs, you would put that information on a letterhead, describe what those funds are being used for, and then submit any supporting documentation like invoices to us via the state mailbox. And then we would review that information and provide you with a determination for approval.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next up is Carrie, and then after Carrie, we will go to Jeremy and then Sandy. So Carrie, your mic should be unmuted. Carrie, if you're talking, we cannot hear you. Oh. So
and I figured it out.
Okay, go ahead, Carrie. So I'm going to go to Jeremy next. And after Jeremy is Sandy. So Jeremy, your mic is unmuted now.
Hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. This is probably for Chris. Just for everybody from the U.S. Department. Also, I can't type anything in the Q&A too, so there may be some permissions that you guys probably need to look into, because it sounds like there's a lot of people on the call that can't do that. But Chris and others from the U.S. Department, thanks for the webinar. I agree. If you could send that to the state contacts that are on this call, that would be great, the webinar slides. But my question specifically is around the late liquidation applications for ARP, ESSER, and GEER, and EANS. I believe that that can all be in one application, but if this was already noted, I apologize for missing it, but there's another application for ARP homeless. I was wondering why those couldn't be joined together.
Mark, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that your preference would be to do one submission, and that submission includes both programs. Is that what I'm hearing you ask?
Yes, it's my understanding that and Chris, you know, I'm from Ohio. We've submitted late liquidations before for both ESSER 1 and 2. And for this late liquidation, it's my understanding that your process is that it has to be two separate applications, one application for ARP homeless or ARP homeless, and another application for ARP ESSER, GEER, and EANS. And my question is, why can't we as states just submit one and not have to have two separate applications?
So the reason that, though the template is the same, you have two separate programs that are also being implemented by two separate offices. So when we're managing your specific ESSER extension, let's say, and the other office is managing your separate liquidation extension for ARP HCY, we're independently managing those two programs. And so ARP HCY, we endeavored to ensure that our processes were the same, but just like for other grant administration practices, you know, there are the discrete individual activities that happen for each of the programs, and we operate, you know, this process in much the same way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just think that's more something the U.S. Department's process that could be worked out rather than the states have to do that. But I understand the explanation. But the EANS program, the GEER program, is also different than our ESSER program. But those are all on one. And I understand it's in a different office, but it's also my understanding it still has to go through the state grant coordinator, right, role, and then that state grant coordinator then forwards it on to the appropriate office.
To be clear, the request template is the same for ARP ESSER, ARP EANS, and ARP HCY. You, as a state, would submit to us one complete programmatic request for ARP ESSER. You would submit a second complete template specific to your use of ARP EANS funds. And you wouldn't be submitting to us a single liquidation extension request for ARP EANS and ARP ESSER in the same template.
Oh, okay. Then I misunderstood that. I thought, so for every program, there will be a separate request. So if we, in other words, Ohio, we plan to submit a late liquidation for all four, right? So ARP EANS, ARP ESSER, ARP homeless, and I believe if there is something, I don't want to misstate this, but GEER extenuation, you know, as well. But it sounds like that there have to be a separate application for each one of them, right, Chris?
Correct. Now, I want to pause for a second on a distinction that I think you're making, Jeremy, which is in the EANS program, if Ohio had reverted funds that the governor used for purposes that were allowable under GEER, those funds are still EANS funds. And so when you submit your ARP EANS request, you would include those reverted funds that you're seeking the extension for in that single request. There is not an ARP EANS, there is not an ARP GEER program.
That's correct.
Those funds still remain EANS funds.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. I misspoke. Yeah, that's what we plan to do. So thank you for clarification.
Of course.
All right, Sandy, your mic is open. Sandy, looks like you may need to unmute. If you're talking, we can't hear you. So we'll come back to you, Sandy, just in the interest of time. So I'll transition, unless it's just me that can't hear Sandy. And
I also cannot hear her.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Sandy, I'm going to go to Alan, and then we'll come back to you. So hopefully I'll be able to keep your hand raised. Alan?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. I have two questions. First, related to the inclusion of consolidated admin funds on a liquidation extension request. My state is only submitting a liquidation extension for the ARP EHCY funds. We are consolidating admin for ARP EHCY, ARP ESSER, and Title 1A. On the form, would we include the complete consolidated admin pool, or only the portion of the pool that came from EHCY, the EHCY program?
This is Christopher, you will only include the amount to be liquidated specific to that individual program. So the ARP HCY.
Okay, great, thank you.
Consolidation. Yep.
And then my other question is related to the route payment process. Since we are consolidating, as I said, ARP ESSER, ARP EHCY, and then our Fed 23 Title 1A admin funds, we also received a waiver extension for the rest of our Title 1A program for Fed 23. Will the route payment process only apply in G5 to ARP ESSER and ARP EHCY, those awards, or will it also apply to our 23 Title 1A award?
It should only apply to your ARP HCY and ARP ESSER program funds. And that's so that the liquidation process for those funds aligns generally with how all of the your state's extension is operationalized.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, Sandy, let's give it a try. I see that you have unmuted yourself on your end, but I don't hear you. Sandy, I'm going to put my email in the chat, because you may not be able, based on permissions, to put anything in the chat. And so, oops, muted myself. Shoot me an email with your question, and hopefully I'll get it by the time this meeting ends, and I will verbally ask it on your end, on your behalf. And I see Matt's hand up. So Matt, you should be unmuted now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, great. I'm not going to make a comment about the disabled chat or
Stop.
Q&A, Chloe. I do have a question about the memo from several months ago about $1 million or more of facilities funds and the obligation of some of our subgrantees who did HVAC projects and sort of large capital projects to report on the federal interest over a 15-year period on that, and also to have their to go to their local registry of deeds and make sure it's the federal interest is at least recorded. I heard a couple months ago that perhaps some new guidance would be forthcoming, or maybe some clarifying guidance, or maybe some FAQs. I'm just wondering if that's still the plan.
I'm gonna jump in here. Matt, I think you're probably referring to the presentation that I gave at the finance group. Yep. I think I got a similar question.
Yeah, and I asked it.
Oh, okay, good. So two things. 2 points of clarification. We are looking at the possibility of doing another webinar on this topic in December or early January. The requirement specifically related to the reporting of interest is around your LEAs providing their data to you using the associated requirements. We at the department will monitor the implementation of recording and reporting during our regular monitoring going forward. There isn't an expectation that by January 28th, you would be then taking that information and passing it along to us. So more to come in that space. We are planning to do another TA event to go back through that guidance and just remind people of the milestones. The forms that I think we talked about back in September have gone through our clearance process. There are current versions that already exist. The forms are being updated, and so we'll send out a link to the new forms. There were minor changes, but for now, you at the state and your district should feel comfortable using the forms that were shared in our announcement, from some time ago.
Okay, that's really helpful, Christopher. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I saw you come off of mute, Sandy.
Can you hear me now?
Oh my gosh, I can hear you. Yes.
What it was is my microphone itself was muted. Oh, so frustrating. And I had no idea, so I apologize for that. Okay, the question is, I've been bugging Brandon, actually, our program officer, about this, but I wanted to further the question in regards to reopening earlier periods, reporting periods. I'd heard previously that no periods prior to fiscal year 23 were going to be open, but we were really hoping that we could open up all the periods because there's some cleanup that we needed to make in order for the latter periods to be as accurate. It looks like we may be double counting allocations and expenditures in earlier periods, which are throwing off the later periods. I mean, we could always reconcile as much as we can, but it would be great if we could just clean it all up. And the reason for all this is we've had a lot of staff turnover. So that's caused some issues, and we just want to be able to clean everything up. And if we can't open it up prior to fiscal year 23, can you provide a reason as to why we can't? Thank you.
Yes, Sandy, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And also thanks for your work to make sure that your state's reporting accurate information. So yes, we do not currently have any plans to reopen past annual performance reports. Next year, you will have the opportunity to make updates to your fiscal year 2023 reports, kind of in the same way that we've done that every year. But we don't have plans to open the 2020, 2021, or 2022 reports again. And that shouldn't impact your ability to report accurate data in your corrections for your 2023 data next year, or 2024 reports, or reports going forward. You can always update your information to make sure that it's accurate, even though we do kind of pre-fill some previous information in the reporting templates. If you know that information that we pre-fill for you based on your past submissions is incorrect, you can update that data and provide correct data. The reason that we don't have plans to open past collections is really due to capacity and the way that the reporting system works. Because each kind of report builds off data from previous reports, updates to the initial reports, could have kind of like downstream impacts on the continuity of all of the data that you've submitted. So again, we don't have plans to reopen the really old reports. You will be able to make updates to your fiscal year 23 data next year. This will not prevent you from submitting accurate data next year or going forward. Again, any of the data that's pre-filled in your reports is updatable, so you can provide accurate data going forward. Thanks.
Oh, that's good to know, because that's what I'm concerned about is FY 20, 21, and 22
Absolutely.
impacting later. But if we can request to update pre-filled data, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I would recommend, if you have specific questions about your state's data, our reporting help desk can help you answer that, and they can pull up the data you've submitted and walk you through potential issues to really make sure that you're giving us the most complete and accurate data possible. Since our chat is open, I will post that email address for the reporting help desk in the chat. Please feel free to email any questions you have to them, and they'll help you out. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I know we're a little past time. Thank you so much for hanging on, and apologies, we started a few moments late. If we didn't get a chance to, I believe all questions that were in the Q&A and all hands were addressed, but if nothing, or if you still have lingering questions, please feel free to reach out to your program officer, to your state inbox. As I said earlier, this webinar, both the recording and the slides, will be made available. And thank you so much for bearing with us as we transition webinar platforms. We hope to have some of these issues worked out in the future. And at this time, the webinar will end. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.